All right, welcome back. And on Prime at this time, we're going to look at some of the issues that are affecting us, in society, in communities. And one of those big ones is when we see collapsed buildings. Unfortunately, we've seen two of those in as many weeks in Nairobi. And joining us to have that conversation tonight, to then be able to have a discussion around some of those things, is the president of the Institution of Engineers of Kenya, Engineer Shama Kiteme. He's here this evening. Good evening.
Good evening.
Karibu sana.
Asante.
Thank you for being here tonight as we look at some of these issues. January 10th was not a very fun day because, we saw a number of things as a result of another collapse. Before that, we had seen the collapse of a building in Nairobi's South Sea area, south of the city, of course. But what this did is that, millions of shillings of property lost, but not just that, but lives lost, people under the rubble for some time. Yeah. And then no sooner had we come reeling from the effects of that, we saw yet another building come down in Karen. And this is not the only thing that has happened easily years ago. We've seen many of these happen, Nyamakima area, other parts of the city, and we've unfortunately seen the same thing happening. So one would ask an overall question in terms of, from an engineer's point of view, what's going on here?
Well, let me start by really passing my condolences to the families of those who lost their loved ones, and we are counting 4 people. It is very sad, and like you've asked, from the engineering point of view, buildings collapse because of structural reasons. They will not collapse because of architectural reasons and all that. And structural integrity for building is very important. As structural engineers, what we do, we look at the structure and we design it to make sure that from foundations to the top floor, the building is going to withstand the weight of the occupants, but also the safe weight of the building itself.
Right.
And so what that means is that the building is designed to withstand both axial loads, or the weight of the occupants and its weight, but also elements of nature. And the elements could be earthquakes, they could be wind, it could be sometimes accidental loads. And therefore, every time a building has collapsed, the problem is structural integrity. And that is basically an engineering issue. Okay,
so engineering, a career of solutions, a practice of solutions. Yeah. But this solution obviously has not been met when you see a building collapse. And based on what you've just said, that the design is made to secure a building against environmental elements.
Yes.
So if we see a building coming down, then there was a mistake that was made at the structural engineering phase?
Definitely, almost always.
Okay.
Yes.
Does this speak to lack of skills or lack of proper training? This is interesting that I should ask this question, and maybe just as a tag on to that, we did hear from the association a few years ago that they were not getting qualified engineers coming out of institutions of higher learning. Do these two marry in any way?
They don't, in any way.
They don't?
And I'll tell you why. When we look back from the 90s, the collapse of buildings has been happening, and we're talking of over 100 buildings now. We are talking of over 200 lives lost. We are talking of over 3 billion lost. And there has been a study done to establish why. Now, the findings indicate that largely poor workmanship is a contributor. The other key thing is substandard materials. And of course, poor structural design comes in, but also poor maintenance, and lastly, failure to comply on various requirements that you're supposed to meet. Now, it is not true that you don't have experience. The fact is, every time a developer wants to implement a building construction, the developer is one who has the money.
Okay.
And the saying goes like, who pays, the person who pays the piper
holds the tune.
So the developer has a say whether we will retain professionals or not.
Okay.
And the thing is, we have trained, experienced qualified, licensed professional engineers. But unless you involve them in your building, they will not come and force themselves over there. So we have a scenario whereby, and some of the recent buildings we have seen, you can't trace the approval from the county. You can't trace it. You cannot, and when you don't have approval from the county, for example, there's no way you can get structural approval, a certificate of compliance from NCA. So lack of structural approval from the county. Then you go to the National Construction Authority, you can't get certificate of compliance because you need the approved structural drawings by the structural engineer from the county. And then you have a scenario whereby there's a record of a structural engineer, for example, in the National Construction Authority, and the person on site, it's a totally different thing. When we get the report from the architect, it gives us a totally different thing. So you can tell there's a pattern.
So let me understand something here. When you talk about a totally different thing, is that on paper, a structural engineer was on record.
Absolutely.
The boards that we see at construction sites, a construction engineer was there, a structural engineer was there, in the records at county government, for example, but that the truth of the matter is that on ground, such a person didn't exist.
That is one of the reality.
Okay.
But some of what we've seen recently at the National Construction Authority, there is a record. When you come to the site, it's a totally different person. And then you start reading stories and all that. What that leads is to the fact that between the county to the National Construction Authority, someone was able to get what they want without getting the proper approvals. And therefore, you cannot even trace the place of the professional. What am I saying? I'm saying what we are seeing is a pattern of developers not retaining professionals.
Why would a developer who is obviously developing a building want to compromise on quality and safety if this entity is to bring them some kind of commercial value? Why would they want to do that?
Various reasons. One, you think engaging professionals is expensive. It is not. It is more expensive when your building collapses because you have not engaged professionals. Sometimes they also want to say, okay, I can do it, I know it. We have done this several times, which I find very unfortunate. And I've seen even educated people saying, I don't need the engineer. I don't need the architect. I can do it myself. And there is where we're having the problem. The problem starts right there. Look, you need a journalist to come to Standard Group to be able to do a professional job.
Sure.
You need a doctor to the hospital to do a professional job of a doctor. You need an advocate in the court, both in the bench and the bar. Why do you want a construction site where you have quacks? It is part of the problem we have as a society. And I believe also very big contributor to this process is a culture of accepting what is unacceptable. And corruption comes into place. The fact that you can get the approvals through the various stages without following the right process and all that, it tells you money exchanges hands, and we are compromising the safety of our people. And that's why we are seeing unfortunate deaths that are preventable.
Well, let's look at a county system, for example, whereby any buildings that you put up within the county have to go through county approval at several levels. Environment, whether it's structural, all of this has to happen. And that by the time the first brick is laid, the assumption is that this approval has been granted.
Yep.
So at the county level, who would bear the responsibility for giving approvals for a building which came down, to which you said is a structural issue?
Look,
in layman's questions here, whose fault is it?
Now, you've rightly put it. Fact is, planning is a devolved function to the counties. The building code, which is an instrument relevant to what we are discussing, apportions that responsibility to someone called approving authority, and this is CECM, in charge of planning. Someone takes that responsibility, but it is expected that he has staff or hands below him, and it's their responsibility to equip the planning department and function with the relevant staff. And what we have said is professionals in the built environment at least have a chief architect, chief planner, and a chief engineer.
Right.
So that then, if you know an approval has been granted, you can ask the planner, were the checks done? You can ask the architect, did you check this? You can ask the chief engineer, did you do the necessary tests?
Okay.
Therefore, the law recognizes the CECM in charge of planning and based on the building code. But we expect that the CECM has staff working under him, and it's his administrative decision to make sure that he staffs that department appropriately.
Okay, let's come back to the CCM in just a minute. But, you know, if you did a post-mortem of a building, kind of like, you know, when there's death in human form, you do a post-mortem and you can find out the cause of death. Can you do the same thing with a building? You can, but the problem we have is that we have several ways we are cheating the system. Okay.
In this way. There must be traceability. When that approval was, submission was done in the county, which officer handled it? Who checked? There should be a traceability and even rubber stamps and all that. But the problem we have right now is the counties have reduced the process of approval into revenue generation, not value addition, QA, QC process. Okay, so if I'm putting up a building in Nairobi, wherever there's land left, for example, I would need several approvals. What you're telling me is that I can swap the almighty Kenya shilling for an approval, and I'm not really thinking about the damage that could be done. Karen, South Sea. Is that what we're saying? That's what I'm saying, and we have said it before. We have been very vocal as the Institution of Engineers of Kenya. We have appeared before the County Assembly of Nairobi County. They have asked us, we have given our submission, complaining that what we are seeing, the pattern we are seeing, is misuse and abuse of the approval process that we need to entice bribes and all that. Okay. But the other thing that I need to point out is this. Primarily, while the responsibility belongs to the CCM and the county to do inspections and stuff like that, we have another thing, we have indemnity form. Indemnity form is signed by the architect, the contractor, and the structural engineer to indemnify the county and therefore pass on the responsibility to the structural engineer or the architect and the contractor. And therefore, that process is also there, and it's a practice we are doing. However, the studies have shown that those countries that have successfully contained this problem, they have done two ways. One, they have engaged accredited checkers. Accredited checkers check through the entire process to make sure that things have been done right. And as built environment professionals, we are calling this peer review process, whereby every step from planning, design, approval, there is a second eye of a professional peer reviewer. The other thing that has been employed by other countries is that we have inspectors at various stages. For example, in the US, the consultants and other jurisdictions actually, the consultants will have their own check, milestone way, that before you pour concrete, there's someone checking steel, whether it has been done and stuff like that. And then when they tick that this is okay, some inspector from the county or from another government agency comes and checks to make sure, yes, this is okay, and then now you can pour concrete. But the other thing, and that is very important, is the fact that the regular inspections from the regulators is necessary to make sure that while the consultants and the professionals involved in the process, there's a government or an independent body that is able to do the checks. The problem is that we have compromised that entire process. If you did an audit right now and you ask yourself, of the buildings that are going on around the country, I mean, there's quite a lot that's going on at the moment, percentage-wise, who has gone through this process that you talk about, where there should be checks, there should be balances, there should be assurance that, you know, these buildings that are going up are actually fitting the bill? Who's doing that? Because you've said quite a number of things. There's corruption, it's wanton. We don't know if these checks are going on. We don't know if the approvals have been given. We have the CS Land said very clearly, she said when she was inspecting at South Sea, that it should have been 10 floors and then maybe it was 14. Things like that seem really serious when we are dealing with these issues. So with this inspection that you're talking about, give or take ballpark, who's actually following these guidelines percentage-wise? Well, what we know from studies, only 20% of construction projects are engaging professionals and are compliant. And various studies, they have demonstrated that the level of compliance is a paltry between 15% to around 18-20%. So we are talking about a big crisis.
That's serious because actually, yes, we did see from a report that was given afterwards, coming from professionals, that 80% of the buildings that are up in different parts of the country are actually at risk of coming down because of this very thing that you mentioned. It would appear to me that we should be a little bit more nervous about this than we actually are.
Well, we quoted a report done by the National Building Inspectorate around 2018. That, and you know, we had a collapse of Huruma Building in 2016 with His Excellency the President Uhuru Kenyatta, through executive orders, asked NBI to, carry out an audit. They carried an audit of about 15,000 buildings. And out of those, only 15% were identified to be safe. That study is there. There's a record. It's not hearsay. And our colleagues in NBI, every time there's a collapse, they go and investigate. They check the materials, they test, they follow through the process. The findings are almost the same. We are not engaging professionals. Poor workmanship, poor substandard materials, poor construction methodology and stuff like that. It is a standard process. And therefore what we have been saying, and as construction professionals, we have been saying, look, this must stop. We must address this from the developer. We must work around the counties to make sure that we improve the efficiency that they need to make sure that we have safe buildings. And part of this, and this understanding, is what led the Institution of Engineers of Kenya to work around the existing laws, Physical and Land Use Planning Act, National Construction Authority, to develop this construction handbook. This is supposed to be used by those people in construction, whether contractors or inspectors, to make sure that there is a check of the work they have been done. And when they check, it is actually checked by a professional. So architectural work will be checked by an architect, qualified license, and they will sign here. Then the structural engineer will do their part, the mechanical engineer, the electrical engineer, because what we are saying, and as per the requirements of the building code, you need all these professionals for safe construction. But it doesn't stop.
Who oversees this process, Engineer Kiteme? Who oversees this process to ensure that the architect, the contractor, the developer, the structural engineer, everybody who is in this chain or this ecosystem of construction is actually doing what they ought to do? Because we've made it, it's very clear from the collapses that we're not able to, take responsibility on our own.
Well, the understanding is when the developer engages this professional, they are trained. They are capable, they are experienced and all that. They will be able to do that. But you also have to make sure that you have engaged them. And therefore, what we have done, and we have come as the Institution of Engineers of Kenya working with Council of Governors, COG and National Construction Authority, is now to provide an instrument and a tool that can make it easy, one, to ensure traceability. Because what we are doing, was there geotechnical investigations done?
Right.
Record. Have you tested steel? Record. Have you done slump tests, cube crushing tests, to establish that what was designed by the structural engineer is what has been done by the contractor on site?
Okay.
There is a record. There is a record of the required professional who takes responsibility. And so with that, even if we are doing post-mortem, like you say, there is traceability, something that is lacking.
Is there traceability now? Because the thing is, I'm going to go back to CS Alice Wahome, what she said in South. I mean, we're still yet to hear anything coming out of Karen substantial in terms of, who did what or who, fell off the wagon. But for South Sea, she was very clear that somebody will go home. And that was my question about post-mortem. 24 hours, 48 hours, if it's slow, you get a post-mortem from a human. And that's why I'm trying to make the comparison between that and a building. How long should it take? If these approvals are signed and sitting in an office somewhere, how long should this traceability process take for us to know, okay, this is the person who made the mistake, that's the person who ought to go home? Or worse, in this case, because people died.
If you do it right, it should not be difficult, because what happens is, in a construction site, not only do you have the approved drawings, which have a rubber stamp and a signature of who is responsible for the designs, but we also, during the normal construction process, we have site meetings, we have site inspections, And of those site meetings, people sign attendance. Site inspection, someone inspects and signs have inspected and approves or says something different. It should not be difficult if it is done right. But the incidents you're talking about is quite problematic and typical case of everything we've seen wrong. And we are hoping to get the report so that we can get answers to this. Because the other thing we are saying as construction professionals, we're saying, look, let us also carry out investigations so that we have lessons learned to implement them. Because you're talking about over 100 buildings going down since 90s. Have we seen anyone taken to
Unfortunately,
jail
200 people dead is 200 people too many.
People.
The 200 that we talked about in the last, 4 or 5 years is 200 people too many for something not to be done about this. Do you think that we take it at value of what it really is? Because a human life lost, is when you think about that could have been, because based on our conversation so far, engineer, is that all, not a few, all of these incidences of building collapses could have been avoided.
They could largely preventable. I mean, we have seen something like in California, wherever we saw a building collapse and all that, and kill over 100 people. So collapse can happen anywhere, all over. We have seen in Taiwan and Thailand during earthquakes, they collapse because you designed to. But what we are saying, many of the collapses we have seen in this country, they are preventable. This is not a country where we have earthquakes any other day. It is not a country whereby we have cyclones and typhoons every other day. This is a fairly predictable climatic setting where we can design very stable structures. What we're saying is there must be collective fury and understanding that, one, the investigations must be done so that we know what we need to do to avoid collapses. But also let's start taking, and as professionals we have said, now we need people to be held accountable, whoever is responsible.
Right.
So that we can start saying, look, you are responsible for this mess. Can you take up the cross? So that tomorrow then we avoid this kind of.
But shouldn't we have seen heads roll by now?
Well,
it's been 3 weeks.
It may
going on 4 weeks since the South Sea collapse.
The difficulty of rushing into taking someone to court when you don't have watertight evidence is because everyone is assumed innocent until proved guilty.
Right, but from your own admission, there's a signature of somebody on a piece of paper somewhere in an office whereby approvals were given for certain things. And I'm going by the citations that the CS gave at that point. More floors that were approved. We're looking at substandard material having been used below that was approved for this building. It seems very clear that somebody's signature is sitting somewhere and that by now should have been found.
Let me say that is what the investigation should help us to uncover. And I'm saying for a good reason. There are so many glaring issues that came out of that whole story. By the time you go for the certificate of compliance at NCA, you need both the structural and architectural approval from county. We saw there was no traceability for structural. How it ended up to have a certificate of compliance, we cannot tell. We saw the approvals for the county when they were submitted is October, given in December. Yet the NCA certificate of compliance coming in November, in between, while it is expected when the other guy have been, when the other approval at the counties is available and all that. So there are so many gaps, and that's why you should not rush into concluding. Let us wait for the investigation report. We are all curious to see where and why are we having these glaring gaps. But the thing is, we have said this as built environment professionals. The problems are systemic.
Have there been incident reports, investigation reports from other collapses? There was the Huduma, there was the big crazy one at Yamakima. Have there been incident reports that pointed to a particular fault or failure in some part and been acted on?
I have quoted a study. The figures are quoted there. A study, it's a report we have, and so it is not hearsay. But number two, the other day you saw the Leaning Tower of Mombasa, which was blown up.
Right.
There was some hint of the findings. The entire report was not released. And that's another problem we've been saying. Please, release these reports after you
so nobody's ever been held accountable?
So, we have not seen successful process of taking through the entire process of accountability. But let me say this. Another thing we have seen very big in Mombasa County, we saw that report from the governor of the approvals done in Mombasa County. 61% were held, only 3 engineers submitted for approvals. 75%, only 5 architects submitted for approvals. That is literally impossible. What that tells you, there's another big menace that we have called credentials renting, whereby you want to cut corners, you come and take my license, for example, you misuse it, you use it, and I do not know that you are even I'm involved in that project and stuff like that. So there is a lot of issues to deal with. What we are saying is that we must now start facing these issues head on.
Absolutely. Seems like there definitely is a lot of work to be done for the protection of society. This handbook, it seems like something that folks should then be able to follow.
Yes.
It still remains the question, who will bail the cat and who will be the overseer of this process? That's why we can't keep keeping silent about some of these things.
We can't, but let me say this. The other day, a few years ago, we saw Mishuki come into, John Mishuki come into and create a lot of, streamlining of the industry. I do believe strongly that leadership is required from someone somewhere. And we must say the regulators responsible for construction materials, KEBS, the regulators responsible for professionals, Borax, EBK, the regulators responsible for contractors, National Construction Authority. This monkey squarely falls on you. We must find a way of addressing this thing, because what we are seeing, it cannot remain like this.
Definitely, of course, keeping those conversations in the open. Thank you for being here this evening. Engineer Shama Kiteme, the president of the Institution of Engineers of Kenya. Thank you for joining us tonight on Prime to open up some of these matters.
Thanks.
And even as we wrap up that conversation, looking at those issues around building collapses, I hope that not another one comes down with some of those issues. And wrapping up things on Prime tonight, but let's take a look at what weather will look like for tomorrow, January 15th. We see Nairobi and central areas cloudy with possible light and rain. Patchy showers in most parts of the city should they come. Coastal areas of Mombasa, warm, partly cloudy, low chance of rain, and we'll also see the highlands with some possible rain later in the day. That's what the forecast looks like for Thursday, the 15th of January in most parts of the country. That's all we have for you tonight on KTN Prime. Thank you for keeping it here as we did. As we come to more news and information, we'll be here on Prime to let you know more about that. My name is Nduoko. Our sign language interpreter tonight has been Maresha Owiti. Have a good night. Thank you for keeping it here.